Well, welcome back everybody to another episode of Sips of History. My name is Michael Mumaw. I'm the lead ranger here at Cane River National Heritage Area. And today we're out here on Front Street here in Natchitoches. Today still a busy thoroughfare through the downtown area of Natchitoches. Even more so in the 1920s during the Prohibition era. Here on Front Street you would have had numerous restaurants, grocery stores, and drug stores that might have been able to serve alcohol underneath the table, or in the case of druggists, could have legally prescribed medicinal alcohol with a prescription from a doctor. But it was also a stopping off point for whiskey runners along the Jefferson Highway, which Front Street is part of. In fact, looking at the archives of newspapers from around 1925, we come across an interesting story entitled "Capture of Whiskey Runners." Unfortunately, due to the inability to find certain business names in the Sanborn maps that we're using as reference to the locations, we have to kind of make a guess about where this incident occurs. But in 1925, a pair of whiskey runners stopped in at the Little Gem Café here on Front Street. And I'll read you a little bit about what the article tells us. It says, "Hard luck is the lot of two whiskey runners who attempted to pass through here Wednesday night with about 250 quarts of white label Canadian Club and Old Times whiskey. Hard luck is also the lot of the thirsty in Dallas and the vicinity, for that was the destination of the illegal cargo. The men were traveling in two cars, one a Cadillac, the other a Buick. They stopped at about 8 o'clock at the Little Gem Café on Front Street, and the attention of city policeman Keith Hawthorne was drawn to them. He notified Sheriff Payne and Deputy Weaver, and the three arrested the men who came out of the restaurant. They were charged with possession of whiskey and will be arraigned this week. They gave the names and addresses as follows: a C.J. Garfield of Alexandria, Louisiana, a J.V. Graves of Dallas, and where they were headed to when they were captured." So this gives us a good look at the fact that whiskey runners were utilizing the Jefferson Highway and stopping over at Natchitoches restaurants on their way either from New Orleans heading to Dallas or Shreveport. And just a few blocks from here would have been, and still is, the Natchitoches Parish courthouse. During the 1920s, especially once there was a bigger impact on the whiskey runners and bootleggers, you had a lot of local production of illegal alcohol as well. So you did have a large rise of moonshiners and diluters, which took true alcohol and then mixed it with other nefarious concoctions to thin out the drink so that you could have more to sell. So most notably, Natchitoches is known for its corn crops in the 1920s. So a lot of that corn was probably going into moonshiner stills for production for illicit alcohol. With the 1925 courthouse records, we have a brief little overlook at some of the people brought to trial for either production or sale of alcohol. Here again, just in 1925 alone, you have 5 cases of individuals brought up for the illicit sale of alcohol. You have 12 cases for the manufacture of alcohol. You also have about 4 cases for the illegal possession with intent to sell. And then you also have a few crossovers, about 5 cases that have to do with the illegal sale of alcohol, but also infringing on state gaming laws. And then you also have a few interesting cases that are brought up, 2 of which were drunk driving issues in the parish, as well as one individual who was arraigned for being, quote, drunk at a public picnic. So you do have an interesting look at how either the importation or the local production and the cases against those individuals show some light into the actions here during the Prohibition period in Natchitoches. With that, especially understanding the rise of the moonshiner and definitely the diluter, which it's hard to tell with some of these manufacturing cases of illegal alcohol whether they were truly moonshiners or diluters. Both were considered actions in manufacturing. But due to that, the lower grade alcohols produced either by moonshiners or diluters that led a more harsh flavor needed a more flavorful cocktail to kind of cover the flavor and cover the burn. And one of these drinks that we'll look at today is called the Daisy. And if you'll take a few minutes here, we'll step over into the kitchen and show you how that cocktail was produced. Welcome everybody back to the kitchen. In our earlier talk in this presentation, we talked about how the simple illegal importing of alcohol kind of morphed into the rise of the moonshiners and diluters, who were taking original bottled spirits and mixing in medical grade alcohols or mineral spirits and things of that nature, and making really rock gut alcohol that was then had to be passed off in a very flavorful addition cocktail. So kind of looking at that evolution of how people drank during Prohibition due to the change of where their alcohol was coming from, we're taking an interesting look at a drink that in and of itself was in the midst of evolution. Our drink here today is going to be called the Daisy, though you may not have ever heard of that. It's a evolution from the earlier what was called as sours, which was just a basic lemon or lime juice with some alcohol, maybe a little bit of sugar mixed in, maybe an ice cube or two. And from that, the Daisy evolved, which was the addition of seltzer or club soda, which kind of gave it a sparkle deal. And then it evolved even more well into the Prohibition period into what was called the Fizz, which got rid of a lot of the extras that you'll see here, like the grenadine, the powdered sugar, the seasonal fruits, and just went straight into just a little bit of lime juice, a little bit of simple syrup, and seltzer or club soda. It was much easier to produce, and bartenders didn't have to have as much ingredients laid out all the time for their drinks. But since it's a kind of a lost art, if you will, we're going to look at the Daisy. The recipe we have here and the setup is going to be for what was called the New School Daisy, which used a little bit larger glass and actually metal or silver glass instead of the smaller bar glass that the old school Daisy had used. We'll provide both recipes for you later on. And the Daisy could be used with any type of spirit. It became very popular with whiskey, but kind of hearkening to the issues of bathtub gin and things of that nature, we've chosen to use gin for this Daisy. So the recipe originally called for about 2 ounces of gin that we've already poured into our metal glass. The recipe also then called for the juice of about half of a lime. So we're just using juices today, so it's going to be probably about a teaspoon of juice. And then it also calls for a quarter juice of a lime, or sorry, for a lemon. We're going to add that in here. And then we kind of get into the extras that you don't often see in modern day cocktails, but kind of was the standby flavors of the pre-Prohibition and Prohibition, early Prohibition cocktails. Grenadine is still around, pretty easy to access. The recipe calls for 2 dashes of grenadine, so we definitely will not add all of that in here. Pretty delicious. It also calls for about 1 teaspoon of powdered sugar. Put that in there. And then it calls for fine ice. So we're going to use a little bit of crushed ice here today. So we've got our crushed ice in there now. It did call to stir the glass until the mug had become frosted. So we're going to give that a slight stir here, get the mug nice and cool. And then the recipe called for seltzer or club soda. We'll fill that up. And then it called for garnishment of berries in season. We've got some raspberries here that we'll top off with, and a sprig of mint for the garnish. And it did ask that you serve with a straw. So here you have it, a New School Daisy in a silver glass. Would be great on a warm spring or early summer porch. And so with this, I hope you enjoy this cocktail and enjoy your sip of history.